Well, thank you very much, Mark. Great to be here today. Thanks for everything that you and Intuit and the NFF have done for the Campbell Trophy event here. First, I'd like to recognize, I know there's a number of veterans here in the audience. In fact, Tim McGuire, a good friend of mine, is here. So can I ask the veterans to stand up, please? Those of you that served, Tim. There we go. Thanks, guys. Yeah, let me thank you and your families for all that you did for the country. So let me start this afternoon or this morning. What I want to do is talk about some of the leadership lessons that I learned in my 37 years as a Navy SEAL. And they are lessons on teamwork, on accountability, on perseverance. And I hope whether you ever spent a day in the military or not, you'll find these lessons of some value today. But as a military guy, the first thing you always have to do is start off with a quote from Karl von Clausewitz. So Karl von Clausewitz, an 18th century Prussian general who wrote the seminal book on war. And every officer and every senior enlisted guy has to read the book on war. And it talks all about maneuver and all sorts of things you have to do in major combat. But he's got a great quote in the book that says, everything in war is simple. It's just the simple things are difficult. Everything in war is simple, it's just the simple things are difficult. So in 2009, I was heading back to Afghanistan. I'm on a plane and I'm reading an article in a foreign policy magazine from two East Coast PhDs. And we had just done the surge into Afghanistan and we're kind of coming up with a strategy. And these two guys say, you know, the military just doesn't get it. They were a little condescending. So the military just doesn't get it. If they would only build roads, they could connect the villages to the district to the province to the central government. The military just doesn't get it. They just need to build roads to win the war in Afghanistan. Well, no shit. Why didn't we think about that? Well, the answer is we did think about that. It's just that when people are shooting at you and trying to blow you up, it's a little hard to build roads, you know? And this is the nature of leadership. Everything in leadership is simple. It's just hard to do. If I told you, hey, look, here's what you got to do as a leader. You got to take care of the troops. You got to be men and women of great integrity. You got to share the hardships and dangers. It's just hard to do. It's hard to do because we're human, because we have our foibles, because we have our shortfalls. But just because it's hard to do doesn't mean it's complicated. So let's start off with the definition of leadership. So pretty simple. It's accomplishing a goal with the people and the resources you have, but always maintaining the integrity of the organization. The last part of this is what I think a lot of people miss. They know they've got this goal in mind and they're going to win a national championship or they're going to get a gold medal or they're going to, whatever it happens to be, but they forget that if they violate the principles of integrity, if they violate the principles of moral, legal, and ethical, if they violate those principles on their pursuit or in their pursuit of a gold medal or a national championship, it does not go well for them. And you think about the corporate world, and you think today about FTX, and you think about Lehman Brothers, and you think about Enron, and all those companies that were making billions of dollars for their stockholders, but because they were corrupt underneath, yeah, were they leading to a goal? You bet they were, but they were not maintaining the integrity of the organization. So think about that when you think about leadership. It isn't always about the goal, it's about how you get to that goal and whether or not you've maintained the appropriate integrity of that organization. So I want to talk about the first lesson I learned in leadership, actually before I got into the SEALs. I was going through the ROTC program at the University of Texas, and in between your freshman year and your sophomore year, they send you on what they euphemistically call a cruise. Well, in this case, my cruise was on the USS Oled. It's a fast frigate out of Pearl Harbor. And the Navy, in all its wisdom, and I mean this seriously, says that as a prospective officer, you are going to spend the next 9 weeks as a sailor on that ship, as an enlisted man. We didn't have any women on the ship at the time. This was actually 1974. And so you go on the ship and you berth with the enlisted guys. You scrub the heads. You chip the paint. You clean the decks. You work in the boiler room. You do everything the sailors do because the Navy knows that someday you're going to be leading those sailors. And you better understand as a leader the implications of every single decision you make. And I will tell you that was probably the best 9 weeks of leadership training I ever had, because I found out what the sailors thought a good leader looked like. And at the end of the day, a lot of it had to do with the integrity of that leader as well. Did that leader share the hardships? Did they share the dangers? Were they prepared to work hard? And if the answer was yes, 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 and yes, those were the kind of leaders they were looking for. So the issue is straight up. Hey, at the end of the day, understand as a leader, whether you're a coach, whether you're a teacher, whether you're leading 2 people at Starbucks, doesn't make any difference. The decisions you make are going to affect the rank and file. We talk about a thing called professional distance in the military. And professional distance is an interesting concept. In the SEAL teams, we all go through training together. And your professional distance sometimes gets too close. And as a leader, you have a difficult time making a tough decision that's going to affect the men that work for you. But if you get to the point where your professional distance is so far removed from the rank and file, you're going to be making bad decisions as well. You always have to make sure you are not so far removed from the rank and file that you forget how the impact of your decisions are going to affect them. So let's talk about basic underwater demolition SEAL training. We refer to it as BUDS. And this is the first thing you see when you come to BUDS. So you want to be a frogman. Remember, as Navy SEALs, we are first and foremost Navy frogmen. And the course, the basic course, is 6 months long. It takes place in Coronado, California. So if you've ever been out to San Diego, you know, you go over the beautiful Coronado Bay Bridge, you got the Hotel del Coronado, you got the Pacific Ocean. But after 6 months of SEAL training, you never quite look at Coronado the same way again, because it is unquestionably, you know, some of the toughest military training around. It's broken down into 3 phases. The first phase is about 10 weeks long, and it's considered kind of the toughest part of training. And it kind of goes like this. You start your day at the crack of dawn. You do about 2 hours of calisthenics. You get a short break. You go do a 4-mile soft sand run. You get a short break. You go do a 3-mile open ocean swim. You get a short break. You come back. You put a boat on your head. You run to chow. You come back from chow. You get a short break. Then you do an obstacle course. You get a short break. Then you do another couple hours of calisthenics. And then and only then, if you haven't screwed up in the course of the day, you go home about 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. And the whole time, of course, and I went through in 1977, I was being harassed by kind of professional warriors who had spent their formative years in Vietnam. The second phase of training is called your underwater training. You learn to dive the scuba rig, and you learn to dive the Draeger LAR-5. Same thing. You're getting up at the crack of dawn. You're still doing all the PT, but now you're diving 2 or 3 times a day. And then the third phase of training is land warfare. You learn to shoot, move, and communicate. Remember, the acronym SEAL stands for sea, air, and land. So you got to be good in the water, you got to be a good parachutist, and you have to be a good infantryman. So let's take a couple of quick looks here. So this is how you start every day at SEAL training. They are on the grinder. These guys have already screwed up because they're cold, wet, and miserable. The grinder kind of grinds down your spirit, it grinds down your body. This is where you start the first 2 hours of calisthenics. You spend a lot of time in SEAL training kind of carrying your buddy. And a lot of times people come up to me and they say, hey, what's the secret of SEAL training? I say, find the smallest guy you can, because you're going to spend a lot of time carrying that dude. You also do a lot of log PT in order to build the teamwork. I kind of like this picture because when I went through in 1977, you know, that was for those of you that might be my vintage, that was when salt tablets were good, water was bad. Well, we've gotten a little bit more sophisticated. We give the kids canteens, make sure they stay well hydrated. You spend a lot of time getting harassed during the day. You get harassed at night. And then in the 8th week of training, you have what's referred to as Hell Week. Hell Week, when I went through, was 6 days of no sleep, constantly being kept cold, wet, and miserable, and one day down at the Mud Flats. And the Mud Flats was an area in South San Diego where the water from Tijuana and the water from San Diego kind of merged, and it created this kind of muddy slough that was about the size of this area here. And you spend a lot of time in the mud, and you know the wind is howling off the beach, and you are cold, your hands are so swollen you can barely move. It is the day that really tests guys the most, I think, when you go through SEAL training. And then second phase of training, first thing they do is they take you to the pool, they tie your hands and feet, and they throw you in the deep end of the pool. And if you come up, well, you're probably going to be a good SEAL, and if you don't, it's probably not going to work out too well for you. You see this guy here, he has got a couple of instructors around him. I particularly like this picture. For those of you that might be scuba divers, if you look closely, the guy on all fours there has got a double hose regulator on. And nobody dives with double hose regulators anymore. But the reason we use them in SEAL training is so that instructor can take that hose, wrap it around the kid's neck or wrap it around the J valve and cut off his air to find out whether or not he's going to panic underwater. Because remember, again, first and foremost, we are Navy frogmen. So you want to make sure you are spotting these individuals early on. They cannot panic underwater no matter what the circumstances. This is the Draeger LAR-5 closed circuit breathing apparatus, because remember, if you're going to go do a ship attack against an enemy ship, you don't want to have a scuba rig that's letting off bubbles. This is a closed circuit breathing apparatus Those guys will do about a mile swim underwater from Coronado across the bay to where the 32nd Street Naval Base is. They'll put a practice limpet on that and swim back. But the one thing that you learn early on in SEAL training is the nature of teamwork. So we have this thing up real quick, a couple of guys, we love to blow things up in the SEAL teams, love to shoot. But this is what you get early on in SEAL training. You get this thing called an inflatable boat small, an IBS. Weighs about 100 pounds, fully inflated, about 8 feet long. 7 guys carry it. You see them carrying it here. And in the first phase of training, you carry it with you everywhere you go. You carry it to chow, you carry it to the classroom, you carry it up and down the beach. And very early on, the instructors give you a simple task. They want you to take this IBS, paddle out through the surf zone, paddle down, and paddle in. That's it. Paddle out, paddle down, paddle in. And the idea is the guys, number 1 guys there, they're going to kind of take those straps, pull the bow of the IBS into the oncoming surf. Number 2 guys make sure that the boat doesn't wiggle too much. The number 3 guys in the back, they're going to push the boat into the surf. And then as the officer, as soon as that boat gets in the water, you hop in, you put your oar in the water for steerage, and then you call the guys in. 1's in, 2's in, 3's in. And then once everybody's in the boat, you find out what teamwork is all about. Because if everybody in that boat doesn't dig just as hard as everybody else, if everybody in that boat doesn't follow the stroke count of the coxswain, that boat is not going to make it through surf like this, which is what you get in Coronado in the wintertime. And you will find yourself unceremoniously dumped back on the beach. But the other lesson of the little rubber boat was the fact that it took everybody to get you from point A to point B. I don't care if you were the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the smartest SEAL in that boat, you just couldn't paddle the boat by yourself. We're called the SEAL teams for a reason, because it takes a team to get a job done. And as a leader, you need to understand it's about the team. And if it ever becomes about you, you're probably the wrong person to be leading that team. Always remember that it's about the team. When I finally graduated from SEAL training, I head off to my first SEAL team, and I had a great lieutenant there named John Wright, Vietnam vet. And we didn't use the term mentor back then, but that essentially was what he was doing. He was mentoring me. And I remember saying to him, well, what do I need to do? I mean, everybody in the SEAL team that I was in was a Vietnam vet, but me and like 2 other guys. So these were these kind of crusty old senior chiefs and master chiefs. One of the master chiefs had the Navy Cross. That's the 2nd highest award for valor. Whole lot of silver stars, bronze stars, Purple Hearts. And I've got 1 meritorious medal for joining the military, And I remember him saying to me, look, you got to do a couple things. Go find the master chief, go find the senior enlisted guys, sit at their feet and listen to them. Listen to what they have to say. Listen to what they think a good officer should be. But the other part of this is you have got to earn their respect. Your job as a young leader, because even as an ensign, I was going to be in charge of the master chiefs and the senior chiefs. And in order to earn their respect, you had to work hard. You had to come in early. You had to work hard during the day. You had to stay late. You had to come in on the weekends. You had to share the hardships and the dangers with them in order to earn their respect. That's what every leader has to do when they first come to a job. You're not entitled to anything. You've got to earn the respect of the men and women that you are leading. In corporate America, it applies exactly the same. Exactly the same. First thing you need to do, earn their respect. I was fortunate during my time in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan to work for some terrific guys who all understood that if they were going to earn the respect, even though they were generals, you got General Ray Odierno, the former Chief of Staff of the Army, you got General Stan McChrystal, General Dave Petraeus, and I worked for all of them. And they were always out with the troops. They were always sharing the hardships and dangers. They were always finding a way to earn the respect of the men and women that served them, right? I love this quote from Pope Francis. A shepherd should smell like his sheep. A shepherd should smell like a sheep. I think that says a lot about leadership. You have to get down, you have to smell, you have to be with the people that you're leading, or you're probably not going to be making the right decisions. President Zelensky here of Ukraine, I'm often asked about what do you think about his leadership. The guy came from being a professional stand-up comedian to running Ukraine. And I will tell you, one of the best wartime leaders I have seen in a long time. And he has 3 attributes that every leader in a tough position has got to have. First, he has courage. And if you think courage is relegated to the battlefield, you're mistaken. If you just heard this last speaker and the speakers we've been having today, they talk about the courage to be themselves, the courage to admit their mistakes, the courage to stand up when things aren't right. There's a lot of opportunities to showcase your courage. In the case of Zelensky, you may remember when the Russians first invaded Ukraine, we were going to try to get Zelensky to safety. We were going to send an airplane in and pick him up. And his response was, "I don't need a ride, I need more ammunition." Great line. I don't need a ride out of Ukraine, I need more ammunition. Zelensky is always on the front lines. You see pictures of him, he's always with his men as far forward as he can get. As a leader, you have to have stamina. It's hard to be a leader. It is hard to be a leader. He's, I think, 45, 46 years old. He's probably getting 4 hours sleep a night. He is under constant threat of being killed by somebody, and yet he is leading. Requires stamina. And the other thing you have to be able to do is communicate. And again, we didn't talk about it much this morning, but as a leader, your job really is to be able to communicate the mission of whoever you're leading. You've got to be able to inspire them. But if you can't communicate what you're trying to do, if you can't communicate the goal, if you can't communicate the dream, as these guys talked about earlier today, then people are not going to follow you. Zelensky told the world early on, if you're on the side of Ukraine, you're on the side of good. If you're on the side of Russia, you're on the side of evil. That's all you need to know. Good, evil, you pick. Great communicator, right? And he's continued to do this exceedingly well. A couple of quick stories about leadership here that I particularly like. So when I was a young midshipman going through the University of Texas, the very first semester we have a course on naval history. And the professor was teaching us about Admiral Chester Nimitz. Chester Nimitz was in charge of the Pacific Fleet after the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And the year is 1942, it's June of 1942. And Nimitz is having to make a very difficult decision. Is he going to sail what's left of the Pacific Fleet out to engage the Japanese at a small island in the Pacific called Midway? And his staff says, this is really a bad idea. The Japanese are setting a trap for you. They know you're coming. If we lose the Pacific Fleet at this point in time in the war, we're going to lose the war. His staff tells him, bad idea. The guys up in the Pentagon of Washington are saying, bad idea. But something in Nimitz's DNA says, I think this is something I need to do. So he goes to see an old friend of his, a guy named Bull Halsey, Admiral Halsey, another great admiral during the war. Halsey is actually in the hospital because he's got shingles. So he comes to visit Halsey, and he tells Halsey his concerns. He said, look, my staff is telling me I shouldn't do this. Pentagon is telling me I shouldn't do this. Help me understand what I should do. And Halsey, who was this kind of gruff old guy, says, well, Admiral, you used to always tell me, when in command, command. When in command, command. Be prepared to make the tough decisions. Of course, Nimitz goes on to sail the fleet to Midway. We win the Battle of Midway, and that is the beginning of the end of the war in the Pacific. So fast forward almost 50 years from the time I'm a midshipman. Now I'm a 4-star admiral. I'm in my headquarters at Tampa, Florida, headquarters of U.S. Special Operations Command. I'm heading out the door, going on about a 3-week trip. And historically, Special Operations Command had been led by Army guys. So there's a whole lot of Army paraphernalia around, with all due respect to the Army, Tim. Whole lot of Army paraphernalia around. And so as I'm walking out the door, I turned to one of my senior master chiefs who's there, and I said, hey, Chief, get me something naval in here. I mean, we need some naval paraphernalia. I'm a Navy guy. I mean, like, get me Nimitz's desk or something. And I head out. Well, I come back about 3 weeks later. I come into my office, and furniture's all rearranged. And I'm like, what the heck is all this? So I go outside, and I talk to the senior, and I said, Senior, what is all this? And she said, well, Admiral, you told me to get you Nimitz's desk. So I got you Nimitz's desk. I said, what? And she smiled and she said, yeah, the Naval Archives has given you Nimitz's desk, that desk. And I sat at that desk for 3 years. And I remember whenever I had a difficult decision to make, I remembered the man who had sat at this desk. And no decisions I made compared to the decisions he had to make every single day. When you are in charge, you have to make the difficult decisions. That's what the men and women who work for you expect you to do. So, great book by a guy named John Baines. Steve Young earlier today talked about accountability. So Baines has this book called Morale. You'll be hard pressed to find it. It went out of print a long time ago. But in the book Morale, the reader does the forensics on a group called the 2nd Scottish Rifles. And the 2nd Scottish Rifles were a British unit prior to World War I. And they were considered the worst unit in the British Army. And when they went to do the forensics to find out why was this the worst unit in the British Army, they found that the guys that were busting their hump and the guys that were slackers were kind of treated exactly the same. And nobody was held accountable for the fact that they didn't achieve the standard that the commanding officer wanted. Well, a new commanding officer comes in and he says, okay, boys, let me tell you how this is going to go. This is the new standard. We are going to become the best unit in the British Army. And you can either, put your big boy pants on and be prepared to do this, or we're going to move you someplace else, or you are going to suffer the consequences. So he drives them pretty hard, and he sets the standard high, and he holds people accountable. Well, as the story goes, in the Battle of Neuve Chapelle in 1915, the 2nd Scottish Rifles go on to be the most decorated unit in the British Army. It was about accountability. It was about understanding the nature of holding people accountable to a high standard. Everybody that wants to be part of a great team is looking to be held accountable. Nobody looks around and says, hey, where's that mediocre team? That's what I'm looking for. I want to go join the mediocre team. No, I don't care whether you're going to be flipping burgers or whether you want to be on the best football team. You're looking for the best. And the only way to be the best is to set the standard high and hold people accountable. In 1989, I was the executive officer, the number 2 guy at SEAL Team 1. And we had a platoon that was out doing some basically what we called close quarter battle training, CQB. And in the training, the idea was there was kind of a plywood house that we built. Inside the plywood house were the good guys and the bad guys. The bad guys had taken the good guy hostage, and the SEALs were going to come up. And the way we did it was you took some styrofoam with some det cord in it, you put it against the wall or the door, and then a guy had an electric cable that came back and what was referred to as a Claymore clacker. You initiated this electric clacker, it blew the door, and it went down. But if the clacker failed to work, which it failed to work about half the time, at the far end of the stack, see where these guys, far end of the stack was a guy with a shotgun with double-aught buck, big rounds, right? And his job, if it didn't go, because you'd hear this, nothing happened, his job was to come around and blow the door down, right? Blow the hinges off the door. So at this particular day, the guys come up, they're against the door, they put the charge against it, and the guy in the back has got his gun at low port. And then in the film, in the video, because we had been videotaping all this, as the door is about to be blown, you saw him very unconsciously stick his finger in the trigger well. Well, you never put your finger in the trigger well unless you're prepared to pull the trigger. So as his gun is down, the charge does go, he jerks, pulls the trigger, and blows the guy's leg off in front of him. Doesn't even know it, so pumped up, goes in, they go into the door, and all of a sudden, somebody realizes man down. Well, we medevac him, bring everybody back, and now we're trying to figure out what are we going to do with this young man. So I remember watching the young man, and he was a big kid, and I'm actually big for a SEAL. Most SEALs are about 5'8" to 5'10", kind of medium build, wiry guys. But this kid I remember was 6'3", 6'4", probably 235, 240. He played a little high school ball, a little JV ball, and I would watch him walking around the compound as we were waiting to decide what to do with him. And he was kind of slumping like this. And guys would come up to him and they'd pat him on the back and they'd go, hey, Joe, it's all right, man. You're good. Well, myself, I'm the number 2 guy, the commanding officer, the number 1 guy, and the Master Chief Petty Officer, the senior enlisted guy, we all get together. And the Master Chief was a Vietnam vet. And the Master Chief says to the commanding officer, hey, look, sir, Joe's one of our best SEALs. He's really good. It was a mistake. I mean, mistakes happen in wartime. And what you ought to do is you ought to kind of bring him in, kind of wire brush him, yell at him a little bit, and then kind of get back to work. And I thought about it, and I came back to the commanding officer. I said, sir, I respectfully disagree with the Master Chief. I think you need to bring the young man and throw the book at him. Throw the book at him. You ought to take his trident away, bust him in rank. You can take money away as a commanding officer. and, really wire brush him, as we say. The Master Chief and I get into this heated argument. Well, the commanding officer decides on my side and says, okay, we're going to bring the kid in, we're going to really throw the book at him. And in Navy justice, the young man comes in, he's in his dress uniform, the commanding officer's in his dress uniform, very formal event, and sure enough, the commanding officer comes in and just dresses him down. We bust him in rank, take away half his base pay, and we pull his SEAL trident away from him. And an interesting thing happened. He went back out, and the team all of a sudden realized that we were serious about standards, because everybody in that team understood you don't put your finger in the trigger well unless you plan on pulling that trigger. And as good as this guy was, he didn't meet the standard. He failed to meet the standard. And all of a sudden, the team had a whole different appreciation for the leadership. They understood this is the standard, and we're all going to be held accountable. Well, we kept the young man on the team in an administrative fashion, and a year later, he had served his time. We gave him his trident back. A year after that, he became the Sailor of the Year. Because what I noticed with him was, not only did we hold him accountable, but when we held him accountable, it lifted the burden off of him. What was driving him crazy was the fact that he had screwed up and nobody was holding him accountable. When he'd been held accountable, he could hold his head high. He understood that he'd messed up, and he was now being held accountable. The entire team understood it. It was a great lesson for me in accountability. Got to hold people accountable. People want to be part of a great organization, set high standards, hold people accountable. Next story takes place in July of 1863. July of 1863. The Union forces under General Meade have moved to this small town in Pennsylvania called Gettysburg. The Confederate forces show up the next day, and the Union forces have arrayed their soldiers along what is referred to as Cemetery Ridge, the high ground at Gettysburg. And in the far left flank of Cemetery Ridge is what's called Little Round Top. And so as the forces have been arrayed here, there are two ways to break forces and to defeat the enemy. You can break the center. So as the Confederates come, they think, well, maybe we can break the center, and by breaking the center, you split the guys in half, and then it's easier to take them down. Or you turn their flank, right? So at one point in time, General Meade sees that it appears that they are going to try to break the center. And so his subordinate general takes a lot of the forces from the left flank and moves them to the center. But about that point in time, General John B. Hood realizes he's got an opening. So he swings his forces around, and 4 times the amount of forces begin to charge Little Round Top. And at Little Round Top, there's a guy named Joshua Chamberlain, Colonel Joshua Chamberlain. He is in charge of the 20th Maine. Joshua Chamberlain had been a professor, not a professional soldier. But at one point in time, as the rebels are coming up the hill, Chamberlain realizes what he has to do. And he unsheaths his sword, he marshals his men, he charges down the hill, they all follow him, and they repel the Confederate forces. He understood what his job as a leader was. In doing that, Chamberlain saves Little Round Top. In saving Little Round Top, Chamberlain saves Cemetery Ridge. In saving Cemetery Ridge, Chamberlain saves the Battle of Gettysburg. In saving the Battle of Gettysburg, Chamberlain saves the Union Army. In saving the Union Army, Chamberlain saves the United States. And in saving the United States, he saves the world. You think about that for 1 second. One guy who understood what his responsibility was to take on the burden, to move to where the sound of guns were, to lead his men into action against the onslaught of the Confederate forces. That's leadership. And you think about the cascading effect of that. And that's not hyperbole. That is not hyperbole. One man who saves Little Round Top, saves Cemetery Ridge, saves Gettysburg, saves the Union forces, saves the United States of America. You got to move to where the problem is. There are so many times I see leaders that are afraid to move to where the problem is because they know in moving to where the problem is, they will get themselves dirty. Sorry, that's the job of the leader. You've got to move to where the problem is and do the best you can to solve it. So we have a saying in the SEAL teams that the only easy day was yesterday. The only easy day was yesterday. In 2001, I was in a pretty serious parachute accident. busted my pelvis by about 5 inches, fractured my back, ripped all the muscles out of my legs and my stomach, and I was laid up for quite some time. 9/11 happens. Soon thereafter, I get sent to the White House, and I'm still barely able to move when I'm at the White House, but I slowly start to heal. Well, about a year after I'm at the White House, the SEALs down in Virginia Beach, Virginia, have a commander's conference, and I get invited down. And as is typical with SEALs, we start the morning off with a couple hours calisthenics, and then we're going to go do a 10-mile run, 5 2-mile laps around the state park. Well, I get down there, and again, my pelvis to this day is still plated and pinned and all that. And so I'm trying to do the push-ups and the sit-ups, not doing very well. And finally, we get through with the calisthenics, and we get ready to go for the run. And we take off on the run, and I mean, guys take off, and I'm kind of like this. And I don't even see them, a minute or two after they start. Well, about 15 minutes later, I'm kind of doing one of these things. And the fastest kid comes up. And at this point in time in my career, I'm a Navy captain. People think I'm going to go on to be an admiral at that point in time. I have finished my major command tour, pretty important thing. I've done just about all you can do at that point in time. And this young Navy lieutenant comes up. And he comes up beside me, and he looks at me and says, "Sir, what are you doing?" He knew I had had this serious parachute accident. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "What are you doing? You've got nothing left to prove." And he bolted off. And if I'd had the wherewithal, I would have run after him and grabbed him and said, "You're absolutely wrong. Every day you come to work, every day you come to your job, no matter what it is, you've got something to prove." Ronnie Lott talked about being a rookie. You're a rookie every single day. The day you think you are entitled to something else because you're the guy or gal in charge, you're wrong. That's the nature of leadership. Every day you come to work, you got something to prove. And the day you think you don't have anything else to prove, that's probably the day you need to move on. The only thing you're entitled to, more hard work. So, as I'm finishing up here, there's a great book by Stephen Pressfield called The Gates of Fire. It's a historical fiction, but I think it's still one of the best books around. And it's about the Battle of Thermopylae. So for those of you that might have seen the movie, the 300, about the 300 Spartans. So this is the story of the Spartans. And in 480 BC, Xerxes the Great, the head of the Persian army, is moving across Turkey, sweeping across Asia Minor, and now the largest army in the world comes to the borders of Greece. But in order to kind of get into the Greek mainland, they've got to come through this very narrow pass called Thermopylae. So the Spartans under King Leonidas have massed themselves at the pass, and they are outnumbered 10-1. But the Spartans fight for 4 days until every single man is killed but one. Interestingly enough, historically, the Persians managed after 4 days to break through Thermopylae. They get into the Greek mainland, but they have been so exhausted by the fighting, they lose the next fight and they retreat. And in the book, as they are retreating, Xerxes has the one Spartan remaining. He calls the one Spartan forward into his tent. And he wants to know why these Spartans fought so hard for King Leonidas, the king that was leading them. He said, "What was it about King Leonidas that made all of you prepared to give your life?" And the Spartan said, "The king does not abide in his tent while his men bleed and die on the battleground. The king does not dine while his men go hungry, nor sleep while his men stand watch upon the wall. The king does not earn the respect of his men through gold or through fear. The king earns their love through the sweat on his back and the pain he endures on their behalf. The king is the first to lift the heaviest burden and the last to put it down." The king is the first to lift the heaviest burden and the last to put it down. That passage probably sums up everything you need to know about leadership. So in summary, this is it. But everything in war is simple. It's just the simple things are difficult. Be a man or woman of integrity. Let me tell you, nothing matters more for leadership than being a man or woman of integrity. Set high standards, hold people accountable, work hard, move to where the problem is, always take the time to engage with the rank and file. Finally, General Colin Powell, who had been the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of State, I got to be good friends with him before he passed. But in one of his books, he loves to tell this great story about the old general who was at the officers club. It's after hours, the old general's at the officers club, he's had a couple martinis, and in walks a second lieutenant. And the second lieutenant is the very first rank you can achieve in the Army. And the second lieutenant kind of sipping his drink off to the side, and he sees the general sitting over there. So finally he gets up his courage and he goes over to talk to the general. And the general's very gracious, and he listens to the second lieutenant for a while. And then finally the second lieutenant gets a chance to ask the question he's been dying to ask the general. And he says to the general, well, General, what does it take to be a general in the Army? The general says, well, first off, you got to work like a dog. You got to train your troops hard every day. You got to be ready for every single mission. You have to love your soldiers, you have to love the Army, and you have to be prepared to give your life for your country. And the second lieutenant says, so that's what it takes to be a general? And the general says, nah, that's what it takes to be a first lieutenant. Just keep doing that every day and show them what you got. And that's the nature of leadership. Nothing easy about it. Nothing easy about it. Every day, you got to come with your A game. Every day, you got to do all the things that earn the respect of the rank and file, and just keep doing it and showing them what you got. And with that, I'm happy to take questions, please. Thank you.
Hi,
yes, sir.
This is Quinn Gauze. I just want to say thank you so much for being here today.
My pleasure.
Your video on YouTube a while back about making your bed.
Right.
That really impacted me a lot, just on a small level. And being able to wake up and go, we had 5:30 a.m. wake up at Rutgers for, mat drills. So that really helped just my mental. So I just want to say thank you for that.
I appreciate it.
And I wanted to know, the random question, what's your thoughts on David Goggins?
Yeah, David Goggins. So for those of you that, so David Goggins, great SEAL, he did a lot of, remarkable things, set world records and push-ups and pull-ups. And I don't know Dave personally. I've read the first book, haven't had a chance to read the second book yet. But I think he's got, there's a lot about Goggins that I like, which is, hey, I got it, life hasn't been fair, wasn't fair to him. Well, you can wallow in the unfairness all you want. One of the things I talk about in that speech, 2014, was this thing we have called the sugar cookie, right, in SEAL training. And in SEAL training, the instructors are king. Whatever they tell you to do, you got to do. And if they don't like you because you went to UT and they went to OU, or you're from the East Coast and they're from the West Coast, they just don't like the look of your face. They will tell you to hit it, and you have to run fully clothed over the sand dunes. You jump in the Pacific Ocean, you come back, you roll around in the sand, you throw sand everywhere, and the effect is called sugar cookie. But the thing about the sugar cookie that drove a lot of guys crazy was the indiscriminate nature of it. You could have come in first on the run, and you became a sugar cookie. You could have come in first on the swim, and you were sugar cookie. You could have come in first on the exam, the dive exam, and you were still made a sugar cookie. But there was a lesson to be had. These SEALs, when I went through, were all Vietnam vets, and they understood what the lesson was. Hey, life's not fair. Get over it. Life's not fair. Get over it. But a lot of guys struggle with that. When they came in first on the run, they wanted somebody to pat them on the back. When they came in first on the swim, they wanted somebody to recognize their excellence. Doesn't always happen. And I think the thing with Goggins is he understood that early on. He had a rough life growing up. Okay, you can wallow in that, or you can, as so many of the speakers talked about today, you can get beyond that and go be better. Be better than what your past has brought you to. And so that part of Goggins I really like. Yes, sir.
Check. All right. My name is Justin Holman. I went to UCF. And again, Admiral, I want to thank you for your time.
My pleasure. Thanks.
Coming to speak to us. My question for you is very simple. I think a lot of the things that we battle in life are tangible. Yep. Even like us guys all playing football, like we know how to attack weights. We know how to attack learning a hard playbook, whatever it may be. But my question to you is, what is your strategy for battling the things that are intangible? Yeah. So battling things like thoughts and things of that nature. What is your strategy for battling things that are intangible?
Well, my strategy is sitting right back there in the second to last row, and that's my wife, Georgianne. We've been married for 45 years, and she's had to go through a lot. But what I would tell you is find somebody to be, as we say in the teams, your swim buddy. Who is it you can rely on? Somebody that you admire, not somebody that's wallowing in the problems as well, but somebody that's got some strength, and partner with them in your life. Partner with them, because you're going to fall down. And what she has had to do 100 times is pick me up, dust me off, say, it's going to be okay, you're still good, keep moving forward. You need people like that. I mean, I talked about the rubber boat and the fact that you learn very quickly, you can't paddle the boat by yourself. You can't paddle life, you can't get in life by yourself, right? You need to have friends, you need to have colleagues, you need to accept the goodwill of strangers because life is tough. So you want to get through those tough moments, and this is the hardest part we have as SEALs. I mean, all you guys in here that have played football, you would recognize everybody that's on these SEAL teams. They're guys just like you, right? They're type A personalities, there's the big dogs on the porch, and when all of a sudden they have problems, if you think they're going to go tell somebody about their problems, they're not, until all of a sudden that spirals out of control. And so what we have tried to do here over the course of the last couple of years is to say, it's okay, because these guys have been in combat for 20 years. 20 years of combat. Let me tell you, I don't care who you are, you will have been changed spending time in combat. Doesn't mean you come back broken, but it means you come back changed. And so we've said, it's okay. The best guy I had was my command sergeant major. So the senior enlisted guy and all U.S. Special Operations guy and all Special Operations was a guy named Chris Ferris. Ferris had been serving since he was like 18 years old. He was there at Black Hawk Down in Mogadishu. He'd fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he had a lot of issues. But Chris decided to take it upon himself to go tell the other soldiers, look, the commander hired me. Even though I've been going to counseling for a long time, even though I've had a lot of problems, even though my wife and I struggle with these things, he hired me because he knows I'm going to do the job. You can do the job. We can take care of you. But you got to come forward and let us know. So find somebody to help you through those rough times. Yes, sir.
Hi, Brad Cook with St. Ambrose University. Thanks so much again for speaking with us. I was wondering, how did you manage that transition from university to University of Texas system and being a leader within that organization? And you said that rank and file and getting to understand their experience, where before you had a very direct experience, you mentioned the ship, and knowing that life.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I was asked that question almost every time I had a meeting with the donors or the alumni, but they would always phrase it almost like it was a rhetorical question. And they would say, well, you know, when you were in the military, you just told people what to do and they did it. I would be quick to say, well, then you never spent a day in the military. Because the military is like any other organization. You know, as the leader, you have to inspire, you have to manage, you have to motivate. Never once in 37 years did I ever have to give anyone a direct order. Just didn't do it. So the fact of the matter is, the leadership skills I learned in the military were absolutely applicable to the University of Texas system. People want all those things I had on there. They want a leader of integrity. They want a leader that will work hard. They want a leader that's going to make the tough decisions. They may not always agree with the decisions, but they want you to make the tough decisions and not spending your time waffling. What I had to do, which is what you have to do every time you go to a new job, and you know, it was talked about here, I think Sam talked about it, you got to learn the business of the business. So I knew nothing about higher education or healthcare. So the University of Texas system, we've got 8 universities to include Austin, the flagship, but I also had 6 healthcare institutions, very large hospital institutions. I didn't know anything about it. But I brought people in and said, teach me. Teach me what it means to be a chair in a department. What does the dean do? What does the provost do? What does the president do? What are the responsibilities of the student council? Explain these things to me so I can understand. But the fundamentals of leadership, those don't change. Yes, sir.
Admiral, thanks for your time. Neil Tweedy, University of Texas. Just wanted to gauge your reaction, your thoughts. I spent a long time in public education, and over my time in public education, I kind of saw, like, I love everything that you've talked about because accountability, high standards. As athletes, we were all part of that, and setting high standards for my kids in my classroom and on the sports field was great because you could see kids achieve. But I feel like slowly over time, it's harder to hold kids to those same kinds of standards, and you kind of see wither, like an erosion of that, of that concept. What do you gauge our future looks like? How do we deal with that?
Yeah. So let me start by saying I'm the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Z and the Gen X you'll ever meet. That surprises a lot of people because there's this narrative out there that the millennials and the Gen Z and Gen X are these kind of soft, entitled little snowflakes. Well, I'm quick to point out that you've never seen them in a firefight in Afghanistan or going to school at the University of Texas and making a better life for themselves. But I've got another story. So when I was the chancellor of the University of Texas, I was there for 3.5 years, and they've got a big house where the chancellor lives. And we were moving out of the chancellor's house, and I'm boxing up some things, and I see this letter from my mother. My mother passed away in 1986, and this was just a couple of years ago. I see this letter from my mother. It's unopened. I look at the date on the letter, and I realize it's the day I went off to SEAL training. And I'm thinking, oh my God. I mean, my mother sent me this letter. I never saw it. Somehow it got into this box. So I'm sitting down up in my attic, and I'm looking at this letter. So I open this letter. I'm a little teary-eyed. I see my mother's handwriting. I can actually smell the cold cream that my mother used to put on her face in the sink. So I'm sitting there, and back then, women tended to use more flowery. Dearest Bill, you know, you're getting ready to head off to this kind of harsh military training. And I'm thinking, oh, this is great. You know, and she goes, but I have to be honest, I don't think you're up to it. Like, what? She says, you know, you have lived this country club life. We lived about a mile from a 9-hole municipal golf course. That was the country club life. You've lived this country club life. And she goes on, I'm like, what? And then she's got one, she goes, and oh, by the way, you're spoiled, underlined. What? Thank God I didn't read this letter before I went to SEAL training, right? But what had occurred to me was my parents, World War II generation, right? So as kids, they went through the Great Depression. Their parents fought in World War I. My dad fights in World War II. They come back, all the men come back from World War II, and they go on to kind of build. They were the greatest generation. We baby boomers, we were these soft, entitled little snowflakes. So what you find is every generation thinks the new generation is, you know, they're weak, they're soft, they're never going to be able to pull us out of this. This is a great generation. Y'all are part of this. Great generation. What I've said about the millennials that I see is, one, they've got strong friendships, strong relationships. I think some of that is social media. You can keep in touch with people, strong friendship. They mobilize when they see things they don't like. I don't know that my generation did it that much. Millennials do it all the time. I don't always agree with what they mobilize for, but they do that, right? There isn't anything they don't think they can do because they have seen the Steve Jobs and the Bill Gates and the Michael Dells, and they say, well, I can do that. My generation was like, if your dad was in the military, you're going to be in the military. You know, if your dad ran a hardware store, you're going to run a hardware store. Not this generation, not your generation. There's nothing you think you can't do, and that's good. Whatever problems we have, don't worry about it. We're going to be fine because you guys are going to pull us through this. Yeah, it's going to be hard. Yeah, your children never quite do exactly what you expect them to do. Hell, neither did mine. And I'm sure I did with my parents. So I think sometimes where you sit and how you perceive things, it's actually much more hopeful out there. The world's actually a lot better because, I mean, all I got to do is take a look in this room. Take a look in this room. How can you not be inspired by the people in this room? Pretty easy for me to be inspired. Yeah.
We're going to have to wrap up, but give a round of applause for having
Thank you very much.